the experience for all of us. And I think I want to say that at the start of this presentation because I think data is not the enemy. You know, data is a friend. Data brings transparency to what we're doing, and it's incredibly exciting to be able to look at that and say, right, where are the glass ceilings? I'm willing to stand and defend myself as an educator before anyone, because I know the effort I make, I know the efforts of my colleagues, I know the challenges which we face in dealing with the predominantly widening participation student population. And I speak from the heart because I was once one of those widening participation boys. I come from a family where my father left school at 13 and drove a truck. My mother washed dishes in the local hotel and cleaned people's houses. I was a scholarship boy. I worked my way through university in Dublin. And I remember just how intimidating that was. And the secret for my success was not because I was particularly bright or well motivated. The secret of my success at university was because I managed to find a close, supportive academic community where there was lots of contact between staff and students who kind of nurtured that degree that was inside me when there were lots of reasons why I shouldn't have achieved it. And that brings me on to what this project of student representation is about. At the London School of Business and Management, we have a student population of just less than 1,400. And I pointed out some of the main characteristics of that student body a few moments ago. But we are conscious of what's contained in section B5 of the Quality Code, that arrangements exist for the effective representation of the collective student voice at all organizational levels, and these arrangements provide opportunities for all students to be heard. Now, I think what should never be missed in discussions about data is that education does not kind of appeal to a person on the basis of data. It appeals to a person on the basis of its potential to transform our lives. And in that sense, Joy did joke to me earlier, when are you going to get the ancient Greeks in? I'm usually the first to get the ancient Greeks into these, but I was beaten by our esteemed chairman who mentioned Helen of Troy earlier, Philip. But the Greeks understood this. You know, the Greeks understood that education also operates on the level of soul. And that's what grabs us and compels us to go on in our studies. And I think this section of the Quality Code sort of speaks to that because it mentions that the voice of all participants in education is heard. And it's very important to be heard, yeah? And it's very important that students who are coming into higher education, particularly those who come from backgrounds that don't usually go into higher education, that their voice is heard. And what might look like failure in an Oxbridge college is not necessarily failure. When a person is hungry for education, but is also balancing working in the local kebab shop with bringing up children and coming into class every morning, yeah? There's a success story to be told there, and I think it's incumbent on us as alternative providers to be able to tell that story through the data we supply. So this is the overall context of what we're doing in terms of student representation. Now, before the foundation of the Guild at the London School of Business Management, we had a situation characterized mainly as follows. So each of our groups, our seminar groups, elected a academic student representative and a deputy. We call those people stars and deputy stars. And the stars sat on things like course committees, they sat on the student staff consultative forum, and they attended academic committee. Stars also had an open door policy in what was then our Centre for Student Engagement, which is now our Centre for Student Engagement, Wellbeing and Success. So there was an open door policy there where stars were invited to come and sort of share, you know, what was going on the course and if anything was going wrong. But we had 2 designated drop-in sessions each week where they were really encouraged to come in and talk to staff about how the courses were going. So in many ways, the Quality Code, the expectation in B5 of the Quality Code was being met. But then something interesting happened. In 2015, LSBM had a higher education review, and that's an experience, I think, which we all really enjoyed. And it made us, and I mean that, I'm not being sarcastic. And we also became one of the first alternative providers to get a commended judgment, so we were really delighted with that. But it was a good experience, and the student leadership which had been elected the prior year, of course, they had major responsibilities in terms of putting together the student return, yeah, as part of that higher education review. And they got really motivated by it. And in actual fact, the QAA reviewers who came into the institution, I think, did a great deal of good in terms of kind of motivating these student leaders further to get more involved. So basically, a conversation was initiated, and it expanded about how we could really enhance this system of student representation. And this became incredibly important because whenever we're doing anything, like I always understand, I come into education with my students as an equal, but we are naive to think there is not a power differentiation. You know, we have to understand, I think, that there is. And that's not to say we can't be democratic and that we're not equal, but there is a different power dynamic in the teacher-student relationship. And we have to be very careful about how we mess around with that. But what's absolutely clear to me is that I can stand up until I'm blue in the face talking to students and encouraging students to do some particular thing, yeah? And it won't have a fraction of the impact which a peer will have, which a fellow student will have, standing up and saying to the student body, this is what I think you should be doing. Yeah? This is an extraordinarily, it's an extraordinary strength, I think, within higher education to really harness, you know, the power of peers in the delivery of educational services. Moving on from what happened, these are some of the major stepping stones we took. The lead star, so all the stars every year would elect a lead star. So the lead star became a student president. And there was no constitution or law in place. We just started calling him the student president. And that actually began in the Student Union Bar in Birkbeck, where Raman Nazarpour, who was the lead star at the time, we were talking about how are we going to make this step up, yeah? How are we going to, because it was necessary to sort of, we knew we wanted to kind of go towards having an independent guild. And it was one of the things that the lead star said. He said, Cal, I need to be a president. And we started to call the lead star the president. The student president raised the idea of founding a guild at the Student Staff Consultative Forum in October 2015. And a really interesting conversation developed from that. And during the months that followed, students who were interested continued that conversation with staff and with fellow students. And we made some key decisions at the spring 2016 Staff Consultative Forum, most notably the decision to elect a student president. And that kind of raised the whole profile of our system of student representation. So we weren't quite sure, because this was staff, in a sense, doing the job traditionally done of a student union, putting various things in place for the students to kind of take up. We organised the elections for a student president. The next student president, Julian Owusu, was elected, and suddenly Julian became the democratically elected figurehead for this project of actually starting the guild. And then the other thing we were conscious of, now I know Delon, who's our student president, is going to talk to you in a second. One of the things we were conscious of is that we felt it was unfair and unjust to turn around to the student body and say, write us a constitution and we'll review it. Because it just seemed to us that they had so many responsibilities. So we wrote the constitution, not the final constitution. Our academic principal is a lawyer, and so he's a good legal mind. So we actually created a draft constitution, and in September 2016, we handed that to Julian and said, this is something that you need now as a discussion document with fellow students to sit down and work on. And that's exactly what they did. And within 4 months, the guild was formally launched. I'm going to pass over to, before I do pass over to Delon, I'm going to pass over to Delon so he can explain what the student body have done with this. So Delon was elected as student president last year, and Delon made his first major speech only last Friday during our graduation at Senate House to a group of 300. And he turned around to me this morning and he said, Cal, I'm really nervous about talking at this conference this afternoon. And I said, you have no need to be nervous, Delon, because independent higher education are the nicest people you will ever come across. So please give Delon a warm welcome. Delon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, actually, I started LSBM last year in September, and to be honest, I don't know how I actually became a student rep, I was actually I started attending meetings. And after that, as Carl said, we were given the Constitution. So we actually discussed the different things with the Constitution, and we came up with, when our elected members when they're elected, we wouldn't actually follow the traditional university way, like where they have sabbatical officers. We don't believe in that. We're not that traditionalist. So we actually came up and said, our students should first be able to manage work, school, and also their studies. And at our institution, we have a lot of students who are working, well, because it's really expensive to live in London as a student. So because of that, it actually helps them to create time management and also help them with leadership. So that's why we actually didn't go with the traditional way in how student unions are run in the UK. And we actually did not like the idea of having a student union. We thought of it and we looked at the different ways and how we can actually come in actually get the name that project or actually say that, okay, this is a guild, or we came up with a guild. And we were inspired by workers in ancient London who combined learning with working. And this is how our guild is set up. We have the student guild manager, which I'm proud to say that she's one of the graduates from LSBM. And she works together with the student society, along with the student president, myself. And we have the student societies. We have, because we're a really small institution still and we're still growing, we have a business society, business and enterprise, law, accounting, finance, LGBT, and a football. So, then every year in April, the student president, we have an election, which I don't think I want to go next year, but. So what I do, I elect stars, as Carl spoke about the student representative. I select them to represent academic committee, also QUAC, and the course committee. And all the stars actually represent their classes at the SSCF. Then we have the student staff liaison manager, which, because the guild manager and I, we have no access to student information. So if a student has to get information, let's say on finance or a student central card where they can access the student union at University of London, they can actually, we make the application and it goes directly to the student staff liaison manager. So he does the necessary checks to make sure everything goes as planned. And also with the peer advisors, we're happy to say that LSBM subcontract that task to us. So we have 21 peer advisors that actually direct students if they have an issue, let's say finance or anything. Our peer advisors, they're the ones who actually do that. And I'm going back to our societies. When it comes to the LGBT society, I'm happy to say that the leader of the LGBT society is a transgender woman, so that shows diversity at LSBM. And the business and account society, they work together with SOS, that's where Carl works with his department, to actually create and organize the Lighthouse Project. And the business society lead, he actually worked really hard with Carl's team to actually create the hackathon. Have you ever heard of the hackathon? Yeah? Good. So we're happy to say that we actually took part in that. And our law society, they're actually working in connection with the International Bar Association. So we're happy also to say that the International Bar, they actually donated textbooks for our law students who want to study international law. So that's something that we're happy to have. Oh crap, sorry. Sorry. And one more thing. Oh, that's me. Thank you very much.
So we are. You're not too nervous to say we are. No, so we are, because you can talk with me through the next bit. So to bring it all home. The peer advisors that you mentioned, Delon, so that's that service that we subcontract out. The Guild trains the peer advisors. They're paid the living wage for London, not the minimum wage, and they provide 45 hours per week of guidance to the students, and it's been a remarkable success. And fair play to you, you've done a brilliant job of managing that since you came into office. It's really brilliant. But we have, at the heart of this LSBM project, we have this ancient Greek notion of the paideia, right? And the paideia was that aspect of ancient Greek education which was concerned with creating good citizens. It was separate from the main part of the curriculum, which was about rhetoric and geometry and mathematics. Paideia was something different. It was about how do we make good citizens. And I think, that's always been a role for education. I always think the last great revolution in British education did not take place in the 20th century, or even in this century. It took place in the 18th century, when Catholics and religious dissenters and nonconformists were not entitled to a university education. So they set up their own academies. And I was in Harvard a couple of years ago, and I was walking around the cemetery there looking for the grave of a man called Charles Morton. Charles Morton established one of the most important academies in North London. And that academy educated Daniel Defoe. Other academies, the Warrington Academy perhaps being the most famous, gave us Joseph Priestley, who discovered where oxygen was. And when we look at how those academies worked, because in those days, the other universities had a reputation for being dens of iniquity and heavy drinking and partying and very little academic rigor. And those academies established themselves, there's journalists in the room, those academies established themselves as offering something really vital to the tradition of education. And again, it was very sort of collegial based. A lot of it took place around dinner tables, with people talking to each other, teachers and staff, again, working as equals, understanding the different differential, you know that word, but at the same time working as equals. So this notion of paideia continues to sort of mean something to us. And it's important to kind of guard those systems that keep us in contact with students. And I think I probably speak for many of us, within the alternative provision sector when I say that that's one of the great joys of working in this sector, is that you end up having close relationships with the students you're educating, which is really impossible in larger situations. So this is a picture of Raphael. If you ever find yourself in the Apostolic Palace in Rome, which I did, Raphael painted these rooms, and this is his famous picture really of the ancient Greek notion of the paideia, containing some of the great intellectual figures from the ancient world. Aristotle and Plato are there in the center, Diogenes of Sinope, there's possibly a woman there as well, Hypatia of Alexandria, but we were struck by just how male and white that picture was. And how, in a sense, when we look at that picture, how can we sort of carry the torch for this tradition of paideia into a 21st century context? So we commissioned a photographer and an artist to do this. And this is our version. So it's the Matisse-esque. Nick Hillman told me to say that. There's two Nick Hillmans in the room. There's a Nick Hillman in the London School of Business and Management as well. He's sitting over here. So it was LSBM's Nick Hillman. He said, call it Matisse-esque. They'll really be impressed by that. So this is basically a picture based on a photograph that was taken of students and staff working together. And it means an incredible amount to me because it says something inspiring, I think, not just about our institution, but I think about institutions that are represented in this room. That it's an incredible joy to work with students for whom success is not inevitable. But most of us in this room could be sitting teaching in public universities where success really is inevitable. And we really welcome this new sort of creative energy coming in to sort of bring transparency and to reignite the relevance of data within our sector. But I think we always have to remember that our fundamental duty is always really to this tradition of education and to make sure that as many people can have their lives transformed by it as possible. So thank you for your attention today.
If Cal and Delon, come and join me up here for just a minute. We've got 5 minutes. We can answer some questions in the room. Delon, come on up and share a microphone. Is there any questions there? I see Sad in the middle. Stefan, if you could give Sad a microphone. I see John as well, so we'll get to next.
Qureshi from SA Institute. Fantastic presentation. We're currently going through these conversations at the moment. I had sort of two questions to sort of roll up into one. One is probably for Cal around how much did it sort of cost to sort of put these things into place. I was looking through the ways to formulate the constitution and certain grant that you might have to give to the student guild, and also if there's a need for a separate financial accounts, just because we're looking at the technicalities around it. Yeah. But also to Delon, in terms of, you said it's a little bit different to the way a union would operate, in the sense you don't have as much time to contribute, etc. So I just wonder if you just unpack that a little bit more in terms of how much time is spent on arranging separate activities yourself as a guild in your own right, and how you sort of may manage that around your work and your studies. Thank you.
Okay. So I think in terms of the funding of it, Delon, you can add it. So the funding of it will be determined at a meeting between the guild trustees and LSBM senior management. So that'll be based on what the guild is going to do over the year ahead and so forth, and that seems to work quite well. And the second thing, I think the key, what Delon mentioned about the guild manager, like in terms of with a widening participation of student body who are juggling lots of different things, like you'll know, for instance, a quality assurance and enhancement committee. We had one last week. The chair is sitting in this room where there was like over 50 documents there. Now, it is not the job of any student, no matter how committed they are as a student rep, to sit and read through 50 policies, yeah? So the guild manager plays a crucial role in briefing students. So all these meetings are preceded by a briefing. So they'll get briefing papers from the guild manager. She will summarize the main points that are being discussed. And the guild manager, who's completely independent of LSBM, she's a guild employee, but she will meet with our quality team. So they communicate in that way, so that the students are not dealing with hundreds of pages of documentation.
Yeah, to answer your question, because I'm normally in the guild from Wednesday afternoon, Thursdays and Fridays, and because my studies come first, the guild comes second. If I have anything planned, I actually just give it on to the guild manager, and she drafts everything, or I would draft it and just submit it to her, and then she would actually go ahead. If I don't have any time, then she would go ahead and do the necessary planning, and then send it back to me, and then we work together on that.
Excellent. Okay, we've got a question will come from the back, sort of two in a row, and we'll take them both together if we can. So if you want to ask your question, then you can ask yours as well.
I spent a number of years at Birkbeck College, London, which actually began as an academy. It was founded by George Birkbeck in the 1780s, so it was very much a working class academy. Mm-hmm. But my question is, I mean, it sounds like the experience of the president and the stars is extremely valuable. So have you thought about certificating that? We have something called the Richmond Leadership Academy. We certificate leadership roles that students take on in the university. We find this particularly helpful for them in terms of employability and also the higher education record of achievement. And indeed, we've actually now established what we call service learning course, an academic course, a very American term, service learning, which provides academic credit for engaging in this type of experiential learning activity. And again, one other little footnote, 60% of our students are international students. We cannot have a sabbatical officer because we'd have to discriminate against international students for whom we could not get a Tier 2 visa.
Okay.
I will say quickly that they can get a Tier 4 visa, but John and I can catch up with that afterwards. Do you want to ask your question as well?
Yeah, I'm just interested how you see this developing, say, over 5 to 10 years, because would you see this ultimately evolving into a much more traditional student union that a larger university might have? Or is there a different vision of where this would be if you were larger and sort of more mature?
Okay. It's a tough question. the first question about certificating the leaders, I think, is a fantastic idea. And actually, you're the second person to mention that to us when we've been talking at other forums about this project. And I think that's something that the Guild will lead on. You know, there's a great relief as a member of staff saying, hey, that ain't my business anymore. You're independent. You don't go and do it. So I think that'll be really, what do you think, Delon?
Yeah, because when you talk about certificating these people, student reps, at the moment, once you're a student rep, at the end of your year, you actually do get a certificate. So you put it on your CV, so this shows that you've been active in universities. It helps with employment.
And I think the other question about where it goes in the long term, again, you know, that's interesting because, you know, by its nature, it has to be independent. So the student body have to decide what route that takes. I mean, one of the things, like very much embedded within curricula at LSBM is this kind of notion of dialogue. And I think when you were talking about the Guild, I remember Julian leading that conversation, your predecessor, with the student body about what dialogue can look like, you know, and not wanting, well, not really having the time, or dare I say, and be controversial, the luxury to engage in battles, but rather to try and sort of understand, you know, dialogue is really just a high quality conversation, isn't it? It's a high quality debate. And like that's kind of the road we're going down. For me, it would be a tragedy if that dialogical centre was to disappear. I think it's, particularly when you're training, like a large number of our students are doing business management degrees. And, you know, I think this is a really good model to show them, you know, that this is how, you know, business and decisions and moving forward does not need to make other people feel small or does not need to be divisive. It can actually be done in a way where everybody is looked after and respected, and voices, particularly weak and vulnerable voices, are heard and included.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'm sure that they're both here afterwards, and we'll have a chance for discussion after the event. So, well, thank you very, very much for your presentation.
It's been great. Thank you, Joe.